At 6:42 a.m., my phone vibrates on the coffee-stained counter. The screen lights up with one sentence that makes the kitchen feel smaller. "Can you come by tonight? We need to talk about the timeline." Timeline. The word sits in the air between the coffee maker's sputters and the toast's soft hiss. I've been awake long enough to know the patterns of my life. The kettle, the worn cuff of my jacket that always frays at the seam, the ritual of tightening one loose screw before I start the day. I fix things. I like the honesty of that. A hinge that won't catch anymore. A railing that holds when someone leans on it. Fixing has rules. People show up with a problem. I take a tool. The problem gets smaller. A timeline doesn't fit into a toolbox. I let the phone cool in my hand and come back around to the small appliances like I'm testing whether some part of the morning will claim me less. The coffee maker gurgles like a small animal. The toast breathes smoke. I pull the toast out with a butter knife and watch the edges curl. I think of Rachel's handwriting, how she dots her I's with little forward slants that always look like she's pushing herself toward something. She likes plans. She likes calendars. She likes the neat rows of a life that you can look at on a Sunday and know exactly where you'll be on a Tuesday 3 years from now. I am not built that way. My name is Daniel Hayes. I am 32. I carry a roll of blue tape in my back pocket and a habit of tamping down my own questions until they stop making noise. I learned to read rooms by the way floorboards whisper and the way people refuse to look you in the eye when they're holding something fragile inside. I can tell you which hinge needs a longer screw by the way the door slaps in the wind. I can also tell you when a person is leaning on a promise that isn't theirs to keep. Timeline, I say aloud to the quiet of the kitchen, and it sounds smaller than it looked on screen. I put the phone face down like that will keep the word from calling me back later. If you like slow burn stories that don't force their endings, leave a little heart in the comments. The neighborhood around my duplex is all porches and paint that peels in patterns only winters can arrange. I live on the ground floor in a place that always smells faintly of old wood and summer rain. Emma lives across the narrow walk. She has a porch light that stays on late, a line of potted herbs on the rail, and a laugh that sounds like she forgot something heavy and then decided to be gentle about it. I first noticed her from the ladder, balancing on rung 5 while I tightened the gutter spikes on my side of the roof. She was in her scrubs, the hospital logo at her chest fading where the fabric stretched. Her hair was in a loose knot, and a small boy, no more than 8, I guessed, had his toes hooked over the porch step, his eyes fixed on a beetle that had made the mistake of being interesting. "Morning," I called, because polite humans call hello when they are at work. She looked up, and for a second I saw the real map of her face, lines from late-night shifts and something soft at the corners where she smiled. "Morning," she answered. "You always fix the worst-looking job around here?" "Somebody has to," I said, and that was true in the simple, mechanical way the truth often is. I went back to the gutter. The ladder hummed with small assurances. Tools have their language, too. They tell you whether a thing will bend, give, or finally break. Later that week, she texted me because the railing on her porch had started to lean into the weather, as if it wanted to talk to the sky. When I arrived, Noah, her son, was nose-deep in a comic book and a half-formed fort of garden cushions. Emma met me at the top step with a mug that made steam ghosts in the October air. "It's been leaning for a while," she said. "I thought I could ignore it." "I fix things so you don't have to practice ignoring them," I said, already testing the wood with my fingertips. It had that dry, fibrous give of long neglect. A few screws, a new bracket, and it would sit straight again. I worked the way I always did, careful enough to show respect, quick enough to keep someone from waiting. Noah abandoned his fort to hand me a screwdriver like he had been born into a toolbox. He watched everything with the fierce concentration of a kid at a magician's show. When I reached to steady the post he was holding, our hands brushed. It was the kind of accident that could have been anything. The weather, the angle, a slip. It was also not nothing. Fingers touched fingers. He didn't pull away. I felt the small electric charge of being noticed by someone who was not practicing for any role. "You do a good job," he said, as if announcing a fact. Thank you, I said. You got a good eye. Emma watched us for a beat, then smiled in a way that suggested she still had some surprise left for herself at being the adult who set the rules in that house. She told me a little about her shifts, nights in the hospital, the long rhythms of putting someone back together and then stepping back to let them take their first breath again. So you see a lot of fear, I said, and a lot of courage that doesn't look like anything dramatic. She shook her head. Most of the courage is small, she said. It's getting someone to eat when they don't want to. It's sitting while they tell a thing again. It's holding their hand while they figure out how to keep breathing. There was a difference between the steadiness in her voice and the way she folded her fingers over the mug. I noticed that the edges of her engagement ring impression still faintly marked her skin like a memory that had been pressed too close for too long. When she spoke of her past engagement, it came like a small, carefully opened window instead of a sudden gust. It felt like being in a room with someone who loved the outline of me more than the air I needed to breathe, she said once, later, when the porch light had gone from a yellow halo to the soft white of dusk. I left because I couldn't live under that pressure. I was always apologizing for taking up space. I didn't press. Some stories will unfurl if you give them the room. Some won't. We started leaving small things for each other without making announcements about the exchange. I would bring over an extra set of seeds when I found robust basil that didn't look like it had given up yet. She would drop a jar of jam on my steps, and we would both pretend like it had been a coincidence we found ourselves both outside at the same time. In the afternoons, when the light slanted through the maple on my side, I would walk across the narrow land that separated our houses and sit on her porch as if I had simply misplaced my own. Noah would be in the periphery, drawing, building, growing into his little universe, and Emma would hand me a coffee in a mug that had once belonged to someone else. We talked about small, vital things. She asked me about my father and my apprenticeship. I told her about the first time I learned to take apart a clock and put it back together so that the seconds would sound like a promise. She watched me as if she understood the screws in my chest that I habitually tightened to stop them rattling. She didn't ask me to loosen them. She handed me a blanket on a cool night and let the conversation be what it was. Unspectacular, steady, without the urgent need to make declarations. She had a way of listening that made the rest of the world feel less loud. Once, when the radiator in my van started coughing and a storm made all the old things in my life groan, she sat beside me on the porch and said, "You look like you're carrying something with your knees bent." "I fix things," I said, "because habit holds. That's what I know." "Then you know that sometimes you have to let a thing sit so you can see what it's actually doing," she said. "You can't always hammer at it." That line lodged in my chest the way the screw head sat in my pocket, small, metallic, a thing that could either hold something in place or make it impossible to move. Rachel's timeline text was the first small fracture. After that morning, the days became a string of normalities that had the undercurrent of an approaching storm. I went to work. I tightened hinges for a woman who had too many keys. I fixed a porch swing that had decided it wanted to live at an odd angle, and a rotted step on the Davis place. I returned home to a living room that smelled like lemon and order. Rachel left notes on the counter. Laundry sorted, a list of possible weekend trips. She had bookmarked a few houses online that were the color of possibility. We had been together for 2 years. We had argued about the time I spent disappearing for an afternoon because a neighbor needed a hand. She had argued that a man who could commit to 3 afternoons a week could commit to a marriage. She had a calendar that could swallow promises in neat squares. She wanted the decision formalized, an engagement, ceremony, a path forward she could fold into her planner. "At dinner tonight," she said when she came over that evening, lipstick uncannily intact despite a day of meetings, "we need to talk about a timeline." I felt the room tilt like a picture frame coming loose. I had known it was coming, the conversations that map years ahead, but the certainty in her voice landed harder than I expected. "Rachel," I said, slow on purpose, "I don't know if I can give you that timeline." My admission startled us both into silence. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a truth I'd shoved down until it felt like a thing that could be carried without breaking whoever held it. But when I said it out loud, there was room for the word to inhale and exhale in the kitchen like a person. She looked like she was collecting something from the floor of her chest and bracing to speak. "You don't get to keep me on a shelf until you're ready to pick me up," she said. The way she said it made me think of a bookshelf with one book missing, someone running their fingers over the empty space and then moving on. I can't keep putting my life on hold so you can decide if you want to be in it. She was not cruel. She was devastated and precise. She had thought long about what a life with me would look like, down to the placement of future children's rooms and which city we'd go to for anniversaries. Those details had not been fantasies. They had been scaffolding upon which she had wanted to build something permanent. "I don't know how to tell you that I love you without promising things I might not be able to keep," I said. It was a small, honest sentence, like a nail hammered into place. It did not say what she wanted to hear. "You can say the truth," she said, "but truth needs a place to land. You can't keep me in a state of waiting." She left after that, her bag slung over her shoulder, shoes tapping the hallway with the sound of someone trying to stay upright. I stood in the doorway for a long time afterward. The house felt hollow, like a clock missing a hand. The nights after her leaving were a list of small, lonely things. I walked around the duplex as if I could find the space she'd occupied and press it flat like a footprint. I slept poorly. I woke in the middle of the night and found the porch light still on across the walk. Emma's silhouette there, a thin lamp of a person paying attention to the world in a way that didn't require answers. "I don't know why you didn't tell me sooner," she said when I knocked on her door that night. "Because when questions are loud, people knock." She let me in. Noah watched a cartoon, feet tucked up under him like he was protecting his ribs from the wind. "I did tell you," I said, "just not with the right words." She made coffee without asking. It was like getting handed the rule book for something you hadn't planned on playing. "You need to make a choice," she said, not pressing, but present. "I can't give her a calendar," I said, "and I don't want to fake it. Fake promises suffocate. I've seen it in people's faces when they realize they've been breathing for someone else instead of themselves." She handed me a blanket like a small treaty. We sat on the porch, the two of us and the night, the cold pressing in like a question. "True love does not make you afraid to breathe," she said quietly, and the sentence hung between us like a lantern. The line could have been an aphorism, tossed like a pebble. Instead, it landed somewhere in me and made a small, honest dent. I had been thinking of love in terms of plans and timelines and obligations. Hearing it put that way, love as a permission to inhale, not a thing to master, felt like a map redrawn. Noah was quiet. He wasn't asleep, but his cartoon had blurred into background. Every so often he'd glance at me with those clear, precise eyes like he was measuring. Maybe he was used to grown-ups whose words didn't always match their actions. Maybe all kids in general see the seams of things better than we give them credit for. "Are you okay?" Emma asked me. It was not a request for a detailed diagnosis. It was the kind of question that lets someone choose how much light they want to let in. "I don't know yet," I said. She didn't rush me to know. She didn't press me to provide a scaffold. She moved through the kitchen like a calm climate, small, steady motions that suggested the weather inside her was usually tempered. I told her a little, enough so that she could see the shape of the problem without me having to perform every angle of it. I told her about Rachel's plans, about my own inability to map the years like that. I told her about the screws and the things I'd always tried to fix in other people, and why maybe I had kept that template for too long. "You can't fix everything," she said, and she said it like someone who had spent entire nights with hands in unfamiliar territory. Triage, triage, and then had to find the time to breathe herself. Sometimes you stay with someone because they're breathing better with you in the room. I could hear the logic. I could see the honesty. It gave me room to think in a way that didn't feel like being squeezed into a ballot box and told to tick the right box before I'd read the instructions. The next morning, Noah greeted me at the gate with 2 bright marbles he had found somewhere in the yard. He offered one to me as if the gesture of sharing was a small ceremony. "For good luck," he said. Will it make me better at fixing gutters? I asked. No, he said, solemn as only a child can be. But it helps you remember that luck is something you can hold. I laughed because the answer was ridiculous and honest. The little things Noah said often landed with the weight of decisions. He had a way of pointing out the parts of a situation adults had kept politely out of sight. Later that day, I went over to Emma's to help with the garden. She'd decided to finally commit to a little bed of herbs after months of talk. The soil was dark and soft between my fingers. There is a truth to moving dirt with your hands. It's honest labor, and it smells like beginning. Noah worked with us, pressing seeds into little rows, the tiny indentations like promises. We talked about small things. The future of the basil plant, which herbs did well in partial shade. And then, as we sat back on the steps with dirt under our nails and sun on our forearms, he asked a question that was not about plants. "Are you going to stay?" he asked, casual as a request for more water. It was so simple. A child's syntax, unadorned. He looked right at me, unblinking, like he expected an answer to be a thing you could hand back. The question knocked the wind out of me in the way an unexpected breeze will rattle the surface of a bowl of soup. It was the kind of line people spend years constructing in therapy. A child asked it as if trading marbles. I remember my first reaction. A laugh that wasn't a laugh, and the reflex to deflect. "I'm not even sure I'm qualified to be a basil gardener," I said, because humor is a decent shield. Noah didn't smile. He held my gaze like a ledger. "My mom says you help fix things, but she also says some things don't need fixing." He tilted his head, honest and undramatic. "If you stay, will you stay for me too? Or just for selling screws?" The air went thin. It was tender in a way that hurt. He had not asked whether I loved his mother or whether I would marry her. He asked whether my staying would be about presence or performance. He reduced the whole argument about timelines and calendars to a child's clarity. "Will you remain when the thing is not glorious?" I felt my hands go damp, the skin on my fingers remembering tool handles. Everything I'd been evading distilled into a question that had nothing to do with the future on a piece of paper, and everything to do with the next breath Noah would take in the morning. Emma watched us without interrupting. She folded her hands over her knees and let the silence expand. There was a protection in her posture, in the way she didn't fill the space with answers. She trusted that a child could ask a real question, and that a grown man could answer honestly. "That's a big question," I said at last. "No," Noah said. "It isn't, it's just, will you be there? Will you come for cartoons on Saturday? Will you help us plant the tomatoes? Will you be here when it's boring and when it's loud?" The specificity of the list should have made the scope smaller. Instead, it made the stakes enormous. He did not want promises about rings or trips or ceremonies. He wanted constancy. He wanted the cushion of a person in the life he knew the texture of. I had always thought love was the grand gesture, an announced plan, a party where we all clapped. Noah's question erased that fantasy like sunlight through fog. He made it clear that love as lived is mostly about showing up on dull weekdays and patching the railing after a storm. I could see the place where this might look like a simple moral wardrobe choice. Stay, go. But the real choice was not about selfishness or bravery. It hinged on whether I could be honest about the limits of my promises, and also generous enough to let another life need me. "I don't know if I can promise forever," I said, hearing the words form like screws dropped against a metal tray. "But I can promise that if I'm there, I'll do the small things. I'll show up for cartoons. I'll help plant tomatoes. I can practice being someone who stays for the things you actually care about." Noah nodded like he had been given an answer of reasonable quality. He accepted the terms of ordinary affection. He handed me his marble, the one he'd kept for the best luck. I cupped it in my palm like a small, cold sun. Emma's eyes softened in a way that I hadn't seen that night with Rachel. Whatever fragility she carried, whatever fossils of the engagement that had suffocated her, settled into a visible pattern of courage. She reached out and laid her hand over my fingers, as if to make the small promise seal in place. "I don't want you to think you owe her a false timeline," she said, addressing neither of us directly and also addressing both. "You have a right to your pacing. But you also get to make room for other people when you do decide to stay. Staying is work. It's not about fitting someone into a plan, it's about making space. Noah piped up, skipping forward in his own logic. If you stay, you should know our dog snores like a tractor. I already know that, I said, and for the first time in weeks my chest felt less like a locked toolbox and more like a space with an unlocked door. But then the thing that had been gaining momentum, Rachel's insistence on a timeline, came back to the surface. The clarity that Noah's question brought didn't resolve the complications, it only sharpened them. If I chose presence for Emma and her son, that choice would not erase the life I'd built with Rachel. It would require honesty and consequence and possibly pain. And if she wants a calendar? I asked, not wanting to weigh my words but needing the shape of the problem. Then you tell her what you told me, Emma said. You say the truth, Daniel. You don't promise what you don't mean to keep. You don't stay out of obligation. You stay because you want to make the small things someone else's. I remembered Rachel standing in my doorway, cheeks damp, voice steady as a metronome. The timelines she wanted were not demand for drama. They were scaffolding for a life she wanted to build with someone who would help carry its weight. Her pain was real and dignified. She deserved the truth even if the truth burned. Noah's question had done something irreversible. It cut the abstraction from the choice and replaced it with the facts of a child's life. Saturday cartoons, tomato plants, a railing that needed tightening after the winter. It made the stakes immediate. That night, I lay awake listening to the house settle, and the faint noise from across the walk where the hospital's morning shift cars hummed in the distance. The question kept replaying in my head like a record with one favorite line scratched on repeat. Are you going to stay? I had an answer that would be honest, but honest didn't necessarily mean simple. I kept turning the edges of the possibility with my hands like a newly found tool, considering the ways it might be used and the ways it might cut. I walked over to Emma's porch, the same porch we had shared blankets on. Not because I had found a solution, but because sometimes answers need a place to sit before they make their way into a hand. The porch light was on. Noah was asleep, his breath a small rhythm that sounded like a metronome for the house. Emma opened the door when I knocked, her hair a little mussed from sleep, and a cardigan that looked like it had absorbed more kindness than it had been given credit for. She held the railing with both hands like she was anchoring herself. I can't promise you plans, I said. I keep picturing the difference between saying yes because I love you and saying yes because I'm scared of losing a map. I need to be honest with her, and with you. She stepped out and closed the door behind her with a sound that seemed like a hinge finding its groove again. The porch creaked softly, an old chorus that had been waiting to be sung. We sat on the steps, close enough that our knees touched, and the night wrapped us in its thin, forgiving coat. Your hesitation isn't a crime, she said. It only becomes one if you let it become the reason someone else carries the weight of your uncertainty. I don't want to hurt her, I said. Then don't, she said. Don't string her along because you can't hold the idea of a plan. Be honest. The kind of honesty that allows people to choose, even if that choice is to leave. The words were sharp and kind all at once. She had that way. She could press a sore spot and then put a towel on it. We didn't solve the problem. We sat and listened to the night and to Noah's sleeping breath, and to the small sounds of a house that was learning to be whole in its own sections. The question had been asked. The question had landed. It was time for me to decide how I would respond, with avoidance or with presence. I left before dawn. The sky still the color of old metal, the neighborhood quiet in a way that makes you think the world is holding its breath to see what you'll do. My hands still smelled like dirt. The marble in my pocket was cold. There were consequences in the choices ahead. I could hear them like the distant rattle of a storm. I could also feel the clear possibility of a different kind of life, one not laid out on a calendar, but one measured in breakfasts made, and porches sat upon, and railings tightened before someone leaned on them. It felt both terrifying and necessary. As I walked back across the thin land between our houses, the word timeline, from 3 mornings ago, felt like a foreign language. Noah's question had given me a new grammar. I stop before I reach my doorway and watch the sky lighten just enough to let the horizon promise something. My fingers closed on the marble, and for the first time in months I let myself take a full breath, long enough for the air to find the place in my chest that had been constricted by plans, and to sit there without waiting for permission. I walk over to Rachel's place with the marble in my palm, the cold thing a ridiculous steady anchor. The sky is still the color of the metal roof of Mrs. Kelly's garage, thin and unpromising. My jacket cuff brushes the sleeve of my coat. The frayed seam snags on a splinter on the porch rail, and I feel the old, small domestic panic. A snag, a thing that can be fixed. Inside that thought lives the other thought I can't tune out. Honesty will not be comfortable. Her door opens before I can knock. She's taken the few seconds I left myself and turned them into the kind of composure that looks like control. Her hair is the same careful mess it has been for years, a single strand escaping the loose knot at the nape of her neck. There is a paper bag at her feet with prepared vegetables peeking out, Sunday supper serious, as if planning can steady everything. "Daniel," she says, and her voice does the thing I always admired. It tells me everything without asking for more. I say what I came to say as if it's a small, urgent repair. I explain that timelines feel like cages to me, that I can love her without being able to lay out years on a piece of paper. I say it plainly, the way I used to talk to a door frame, measuring where a new hinge would sit. I do not promise her a calendar because I cannot in good conscience give her a scaffold that would later collapse under the weight of my uncertainty. Her face doesn't break. It gathers like a map creased in all the places life has taught you to fold. "I wanted to know," she says, "not to make you wrong, but so I could be safe in my plans. I wanted to know where to build. I didn't want to be a placeholder." She is not angry. She is sad in the precise, inevitable way of someone who has been honest with themselves for a long time, before asking someone else to be honest in return. There's grace in it, and shame that I have given her reason to be measured. "I'm sorry," I say, because sorry is what I have in the tool belt that matches most of what I've broken in the world. "I didn't mean to put you in limbo." She moves like she's deciding whether a thing is worth picking up. "You were right to tell me," she says. "But I can't keep waiting. I'm not built to be someone's practice space. I need someone who will open the door fully and invite me into the rest of the house." There's no melodrama. There is a human problem with a human consequence. She needs a plan I can't deliver. She folds the corners of her fingers around the paper bag, as if measuring where something once sat. "I hope you find the kind of life that suits you, Daniel. I hope that life has more breathing room than the one we've been pretending fits." We stand there for a long second, which is its own sentence. Then she steps back, closes the door with the small, decisive sound of someone who is choosing not to look back at the tracks they've made in another person's dust. I walk away with the taste of lemon detergent and the smell of the boiled vegetables she had planned. Her solitude is not because she failed me. It's because she knew what she deserved and refused to trade herself for a sketch. The walk back to my duplex feels like crossing a room after furniture has been shifted. There are new shadows where things used to be. The marble in my pocket is heavier. The house seems too quiet, like a workshop with no tools on the bench, waiting for someone to pick them up. Sleep doesn't come that morning. I move through the day like a man disassembling a clock to understand its beat. I tighten a hinge for an old woman who cries quietly when I explain the rust is worse than it looks. I repair a sagging step for a single father who tells me, as if confiding the most ordinary of secrets, that his daughter loves to jump off at the top as if gravity is a dare. People hand me problems with the trust that I will make them smaller. The comfort in that exchange is simple and clean. But with my own unsolvable thing, love measured against my unwillingness to promise, there is no quick screwdriver. Late afternoon finds me on Emma's porch again because some answers need to sit in the light before they become words. Noah meets me on the step with a dish of milk and 2 cookies. He has learned the art of comfort in ways children do, practical and immediate. He offers me one and watches to see if I take it. "You okay?" he asks, like a nurse offering a bandage. "I'm not sure," I say, "but I'm trying to be." Emma's smile is steadier now, as if the last few days have taught her to be patient with other people's processes without losing herself. She takes the blanket from the back of the chair and folds it over our knees like a kind of nonverbal promise. "You told her?" she asks. "I did," I say. Saying the words again is like testing a repaired thread. Her face does that gentle, careful thing it does when she makes space for someone else's sorrow. "Was she hurt?" "Yes," I say, "and right to be." That exchange is the part I don't want to dramatize. Rachel deserved a scaffolding. I had no intention of setting it in stone. The worst parts of truth are that it can lead to the loss of something you cared about even when you do the honest thing. Emma doesn't let that become a weapon against me. She lets it sit like another weather report that we can read and then decide how to dress for. We don't have a long conversation about the logistics of what now separates. Instead, the day yields small gestures that feel like a way forward without heavy promises. Noah wants to know if I like comic book heroes, and he insists on reading aloud a page he likes as if seeing the words out loud anchors them. Emma listens like someone who understands that the scaffolding of a family is built of tiny, steady materials. Bowls of soup, a person swapping shifts when a child is sick, a hand at the small, unglamorous moments. The nights are quieter. I wake before dawn, the kind of time I used to spend thinking of ways to make a house soundproof against grief. I find myself on the porch more and more, leaning against the rail I fixed, feeling the screws I tightened press into the wood like small, stern prayers. The air tastes like coming rain, and the kind of honest salt you get when you've been outside all day with your hands in the soil. Noah's question keeps circling in my head with a child's blunt logic. Will you stay? The simplicity of it has become a prism. It cracks all the complicated light into things I can actually see. Presents, cartoons on Saturdays, showing up for the dull, holding a railing steady when someone leans on it. The sun didn't ask me to promise forever. He asked me if my staying would be real when no one was looking. One evening, a week after I told Rachel the truth, a storm kicks up. The kind with sudden wind that tosses old papers from porches and makes the gutters complain. I find myself checking on the duplex, walking the boundary line like someone making sure the fence holds because fences are also promises. One of the boards on Emma's wraparound has loosened in the wind. My hands remember their old language, how to test for rot, how to choose a screw that won't split the grain. I get to work without thinking about it. The motion is reflex, a kind of prayer. Noah runs out barefooted, as if storms are just another part of the day. He holds a flashlight like a scepter. "You're like a hero," he declares seriously. "You make our house not wobble." I smile because it is the truest compliment I've had in a while, not for my own sake, but for the way he recognizes steadiness in the world. Emma watches from the doorway, a towel in her hands, the steam from the shower making her hair soft at the edges. When the last screw goes in and the board sits solid under my palm, I stand and let the rain strike me. The sound is immediate and thick. It scrubs the day's edges into blue. Noah comes up and presses his cold hand into mine. "You stayed," he says like a final test. "It's what I'm practicing," I tell him. That night, drenched and wind-raw, I walk Emma home to her porch because the rain makes streets both small and honest. She answers the door in a cardigan that smells like lemon and soft things. Her face is lit with a tired, fierce sort of kindness. We sit on the porch steps with no blanket because the air is warm, and the rain makes a steady drum on the roof. Noah is inside with a comic and a cup of cocoa, and the dog asleep at his feet. The world narrows to the porch light and the sound of rain. "I think about your question all the time," I say, not in the way that gives me a map of life, but in the way that tells me what matters when the map isn't there. She listens like a patient person listening to a piece of furniture being described. "Is this about Rachel?" she asks, and I can tell she knows the contours of my life without needing a lecture. "Yes," I say. She wanted something tidy, dates and plans and assurance. I couldn't give that. I could give her presents, but she needed something to lean on that I couldn't promise. Emma doesn't judge. She crosses her legs and folds her hands like someone who handles grief every night at work, and still remembers to offer a warm compress. You were honest, she says. That's not nothing. It will change things, but it also makes space for better things. If everyone in the equation knows the truth. I tell her about the way it felt to watch Rachel close the door, how it hurt, and how it felt like removing a cast that had held a broken part still for longer than it should have. I speak about guilt and relief, as if they are the same fabric dyed two different colors. Emma watches me the way a lighthouse watches a boat. Do you regret it? She asks. Regret depends on whether you think deceit is a kindness, I say. I couldn't keep going, not without asking her to carry my undecidedness. There is a long pause that feels like a held breath. Her hand finds mine almost of its own accord. The skin along my palm is still faintly gritty from the rain. Hers is warm and dry. Our fingers twine without fanfare. The contact has the feeling of a socket fitting into its tool. It is small and true. True love doesn't make you afraid to breathe, she repeats. This time not as a line on the porch, but as a statement with a life in it. It gives you the space to inhale. It lets you be messy and whole enough to live. Those words land differently than they did before. They aren't an abstract aphorism. They are an instruction. They give me a way to think of staying as not a binding contract, but as a series of small acts that say, I'm here, across the flat moments of life. You don't have to decide tonight, she says. But decisions have consequences. If you choose to be present for us, it will mean things will shift with Rachel. It will mean that you will need to show up when it's not dramatic. It will mean accepting that your presence is part of a family life that includes a small, uncensorable person who will notice everything. Noah's footsteps cross the porch, soft and careful. He pokes his head around the door and squints up at us like he's checking a document. We're handsome together, he says with the utmost seriousness, and then he grins. Plus, I already like your boots. I laugh properly then, like someone finally letting air out of a held balloon. The sound is honest and small. I look at Emma, at the way her hair is mussed and the way her cardigan clings to her shoulders like an old friend, and I feel a tilt inside me as clear as the alignment of a properly set hinge. Will you wait? I ask, and it's the first time I have put the worry into words that manhandle my stomach at nights. If I decide to be present, with you and Noah, will you allow me to ease into it? Will you let me learn how to be steady without requiring I become someone I'm not? Emma's thumb brushes the back of my hand, patient as the turning of a screw. I will wait, she says, but waiting isn't a place to hide your indecision. If you want to stay, you show up. You help with the dog when he snores like a tractor. You handle the tomatoes when I forget them. You come for the boring things. You don't use one day as a rope to hold someone in. You make space and you choose us sometimes. I can do that. The promise is both small and large because it's a promise of actions, not of fate. It's a commitment to craft a presence that isn't theatrical. I nod, the motion full of intention. The first kiss happens like this. Our hands are still linked when Noah disappears for more cocoa. The porch light throws a halo around Emma's profile. I breathe in the smell of lemon soap and rain-wet cotton. The world is quiet, but for the house settling. I lean in with the care I would give to placing a fragile bracket, and she meets me halfway. It's soft, a brief press of foreheads and lips, a sanctioned closing of the distance we've let exist for weeks. It is not a solution. It is not a coronation. It is the start of a practice. We separate with the kind of breath that says both relief and beginning. Noah is back with a comic folded like a flag. He stares at us, then looks away with the solemnity of a child who has been entrusted with evidence that the world has tilted and yet remains intact. There are practicalities to work through. I call Rachel the next morning because leaving without speaking again would be cowardice. She answers on the second ring. We sit across from each other at a small cafe that makes good coffee and terrible ambient music. She is gentle and I am precise. I explain that I am not sprouting a promise I don't mean to keep. I explain that what I hope to be is someone who shows up, who learns to be steady. She listens with the same dignity she shows in gardens and grocery lists. I appreciate the honesty, she says. I want things that make me feel safe. Maybe those things are different from what you can give. And that's okay. I can choose to stay or to make a different life, but I can't do it while waiting. We don't make vows. We fold the practical parts of us together. Bed sheets, some shared subscriptions, the unglamorous things. And we part with a handshake that asks for no miracles. She kisses my cheek when we say goodbye, an echo of love that does not last in the way she hoped, but does not diminish the care that was there. She deserves someone who can promise her the scaffolding she needs. I deserve to be true to the measure of my breath. The next weeks are not cinematic in the sense of sudden epiphanies. They are incremental and private, showing up at Emma's when she needs to work a double and Noah's stomach is upset, learning the exact way Noah likes his scrambled eggs, getting up on Saturday mornings to watch cartoons while he sprawls across the couch and announces the latest comic book plot with the severity of a court clerk. I paint a small patch of the fence that gets sun in the morning because Emma likes the way a faded blue looks under the maple. We plant the tomato seedlings in a crooked row because Noah insists on spacing them, just like the picture, and because I am learning that some things are better imperfect. A week after that first night, I wake to a Sunday that feels like the inside of an old clock, sunlight warm and slow. Noah comes barreling in with a bowl of cereal and a plan for building a fort that involves every cushion in the house. Emma sips coffee and watches us with the kind of tired affection that is both fierce and calm. I tighten a loose board on the back step because an honest man can't help himself. The action feels like prayer. No one asks me to promise forever. No one gives me a parchment with instructions. What I realize day by day is that staying is not an absolute. It is an accumulation of small, observable behaviors. It is showing up for the boring weekdays. It is answering a 2 a.m. call when a fever spikes. It is agreeing that we will go to the school play even though the planning gives me a small anxiety. It is folding laundry and learning names of cartoon characters and letting the mundane be sacred, because that's where the life lives. Once, when the house is quiet and the dog snores with the kind of honest rumble of a tractor, I stand on the porch and listen to the world breathe. The moon is a pale crescent over the maple. My hands smell faintly of soil and tomato leaves. The marble in my pocket is warm. I feel the weight of decisions around my chest, but they no longer feel like a locked toolbox. They feel like tools I can set down and pick up again. Emma comes out to the porch with 2 mugs of tea because she knows the times my insomnia will call. Some work requires company more than immediate repair. We sit with the rail between us that I once tightened in a hurry, now secure. Her shoulder comes to rest against mine in a small, unremarked way. Noah's footsteps are muffled through the house. He is asleep now, a small metronome of contentment. "Do you ever think about the calendar?" Emma asks. "Sometimes," I admit, but less like a map and more like a ledger of small promises. Coffee tomorrow. Help with the fence next week. Be here when the tomatoes need steaks. She nods as if this is exactly the kind of accounting she can live with. "This is what I choose," she says. "Not because you are perfect at promise-making, but because you will do the work of showing up." I think of Rachel, of what she deserved, and of what we all deserve from the people we love. Not illusions, but honest capacities. I think of Noah's marble, how small things can be a talisman for larger decisions. I think of the hinge in my van that finally stopped squeaking after I'd oiled it with patience. Staying, I say slowly, isn't a lock, it's a practice. Emma smiles in a way that tightens something in my chest. The good kind of tightening that means the hinge is set, and the door will open smoothly. "Then let's practice," she says. Our lips meet again, this time in a kiss that is less an announcement and more a confirmation. It tastes like lemon soap and rain, and the quiet sugar of cookies eaten late, like the world contained in the small acts that will make up our days. When we part, we both breathe in, a full, easy breath that feels almost sacramental after months of shallow ones. I don't plan a wedding on impulse. I don't declare an eternal pledge with dramatic words. I do the thing I promised myself I could do. I show up. I help tighten loose boards. I plant tomatoes in crooked rows with Noah laughing beside me. I sit up with a feverish child and make toast at 3 a.m. I become the man who understands that permanence is not a single announcement. It is a choice renewed at every dull and luminous hour. Weeks fold into months without big fireworks. Emma, fights for another night shift coverage, and I make coffee to leave on the counter because she asked for fewer burdens. Noah draws a comic where the hero is a handyman who mends the world with screws, and gives me the first printed copy as if gratitude can be folded and handed over. Rachel sends a brief message months later to say she found a small house by the river, and that she hopes I'm doing well. I send back a sincere wish for her peace. Our separate choices do not create villains. They create people living according to the truths they can reasonably offer. On a quiet evening with the porch light on and leaves making small patters in the gutter, I stand at the rail and feel the old impulse to fix something. The rail holds firm beneath my palms. Noah is inside setting up a fort for his comic reading club. Emma appears at the doorway with a plant, basil because she remembers how often I bring it over like a peace offering, and hands it to me. "We're doing tomatoes next weekend," she says, smiling. "Count me in," I say. She reaches for my hand and squeezes. The contact is small, like a screw tightened just so. The word timeline visits my mind like a distant neighbor's horn, familiar but no longer my immediate weather. I think of the mornings I used to hold my breath, and the way suffocation had felt like a love measure I couldn't live by. "No one will make you promise forever," Emma says softly, more of a promise than a command. "But we will know every morning if you are here." I close my fingers around hers. The marble in my pocket finds its place against the callus at the base of my thumb. The breath I take is long enough to fill the bit of chest that had been constricted by other people's plans. It's not a triumph. It's an ordinary salvation. The future is still uncertain. That's part of its breath. If this story stayed with you, share what true love means to you below, and follow for more quiet stories about the small, steady things that make a life.